We're back. Loren Schoenberg, and I'm here with Hal Smith and with Nick Rossi as we continue our Benny Goodman series. And we've really, these last few sessions have all been, not that they're all not great, but they've been really at like marker points for the Goodman band. And this next one is a real marker because it's the first small band record date that Goodman does. Let's back up for a moment and just kind of zoom back to where we are in his career. We started in the summer of 1934. Benny Goodman puts together a band for the Music Hall, Billy Rose's Music Hall. They have kind of a success. They record several titles, which we heard for Columbia. They bat around New York, and then they wind up with the Let's Dance radio broadcast starting in December 1935 and going through, I think, till around May or so. And they record for Columbia during that period. They start to establish a reputation, but they're just one amongst a gazillion bands. And then they start recording for Victor Records. And then they play at the Hotel Roosevelt in New York, which is supposed to be a big, great opportunity. It turns out to be a total disaster. They're given their notice pretty soon. And they start on a cross-country trip. And there have been some personnel changes. And by the time the cross-country trip comes in, we have Gene Krupa aboard and Jess Stacy's joining the band. And some of the key players will be with Goodman for a long time. And we actually listened to the famous Victor sessions of June and July 1935, where Bunny Berrigan comes into the band, records some great music. Then the last thing we heard was a broadcast from the summer of 1935, actually at the Palomar Ballroom, with the most extended samples of Bunny Berrigan playing lead trumpet and playing a lot of great solos, and Jess Stacy just bringing everything to fruition in the rhythm section. And they had quite a success in California. It was a real breakthrough, but it was kind of local. And people read about it in the papers, but it wasn't kind of like a big wash across the music industry. Then Goodman left. They closed at the Palomar on October 1st, 1935. And I had the date here, on November 6th, 1935, they wind up in Chicago at the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel. And it's really, in a sense, the real beginning of the national fame and the national swing thing. And all the important parts of Goodman's later career are established at this gig. Teddy Wilson eventually comes out to appear with the trio, so he has a racially integrated band. He records some real all-time hits like Stomping at the Savoy, and some other recordings are going to be made around this time. And the band just really coalesces because they're going to be in one location. It was a 1-month gig, and they wound up staying there for 6 months. And they're broadcasting on NBC nationally. And this is when everything that happened before really just starts to coalesce. And advertising is behind it, and the radio's behind it, and the recordings are behind it. And Teddy Wilson is joining the band. And it's just really kind of a magical moment. However, the first thing that we're going to hear is not this Benny Goodman big band that we talked about, but a small band. And Hal, I'm wondering, maybe you'd like to introduce these recordings or talk a bit about them, because they feature two of your main men, Jess Stacy on the piano, and of course, Gene Krupa on the drums.
Well, I think this is a very significant session because it's the first one under Gene Krupa's name, for one thing. And secondly, there had not been that many recording sessions under drummers' own names, except for long established drummers like Ben Pollock, Zutty Singleton, and Chick Webb. But this 26-year-old kid getting a recording session and his hand-picked personnel under his own name is really something. And it's still, while his star is on the rise and Benny Goodman's star is on the rise. It's kind of surprising to me that it happened this early in his career, but I sure am glad it did. His sidemen are all wonderful, and the drumming on this is really something for 1935.
Yeah. The band is a small band out of the Benny Goodman big band that we know from broadcasts, actually, that Benny was starting to feature a small band, which we'll hear on a broadcast later. But this is, the arrangements are superlative. Anyway, it's just wonderful. We'll talk more about it after the first title. We might as well mention the personnel. Nate Casebeer on the trumpet. We're going to turn to Hal later for some background on Nate Casebeer, fascinating musician. Joe Harris on the trombone, Dick Clark on the tenor, Benny Goodman on the clarinet, of course. And, Benny always plays differently. Some people say better, looser, but when he's free on someone else's record date, it's always fascinating to hear. And in the rhythm section, leader Gene Krupa on the drums, Alan Russo on the guitar, Jess Stacy on the piano, and a ringer on the bass, the teenaged Israel Crosby. This is the last roundup. That was on the very first Benny Goodman LP I bought when I was 13 years old. And it was called Benny Goodman 1933. It was a prestige reissue, kind of like with an orange cover and vertical lines on it. And there was this session and the session with Inda Ruff and Bud Freeman. But anyway, I fell in love with this session at that time. And little did I know that how great it was. I knew I loved it, and I knew I loved that track, and I knew I loved the trumpet on it, and I knew I loved how I grew to appreciate more and more how it wasn't a climactic trumpet solo. It was this long rolling thing, and it didn't have to go up to high notes, and there was a lot of space, and it goes up and it goes down, and there's this rolling rhythm underneath it, and the piano comes in every so often for plink plink and all this kind of stuff, and it had such a vibe to it, it had such a vibration to it. I fell in love with it, and here we are, almost 50 years later. And, it sounds better to me now than even it sounded in 1971. There's so many questions to ask about this record date, and I'm not sure that the answers we'll ever find out. First of all, who wrote the charts? Because the charts are just brilliant. They remind me of the kind of like the Brad Gowan's charts for the Summa Cum Laude band, or some of the Jerry Mulligan and his jazz orchestra charts, where the arranger knew he was writing for it to the point that they could come in and come out of ensemble parts. Some of it's arranged and some of it is ad-libbed, and maybe three of the guys are reading and one guy's making up playing the lead, and someone else is ad-libbing, and then it all switches. They're reading and they're reading something, and this guy down here. I mean, it's just magical music. And a little bit of background on the session, which is that John Hammond had produced some Benny Goodman sides for England back in 1933, and these were some of the Texas Tea Party dates and some of the things with Jack Teagarden and Joe Sullivan and Gene Krupa and folks like that. There wasn't that much market for records like that in the States. But John Hammond, who was, a very important person, was to become a very major talent scout in jazz and producer. He had connections. He had been in England, and there were jazz fans over there and said, "Man, why don't you produce some record sessions so we can issue over here?" They did so well in England that some of them came out in the States as well. This is another one of these recording sessions. This is done for Parlophone and first issued in England, and then it came out on Decca Records in the States. And it's just, I don't even know what to say. I think I said quite a bit there. But let's go to Nick first, because I'm sure that Nate has a lot Hal has a lot to do here. So why don't we go to the guitar first? Talk about what you heard from Alan Roos and anything else you want to say, and then we'll turn it over to Hal.
I got the easy job on this side, in that we didn't hear a lot of guitar on that particular recording. Right. And I think it's interesting to talk just a little bit about why we didn't. And there's so much going on rhythmically in that recording in a wonderful way. And I don't mean this in a disparaging sense at all. You've got that boogie woogie figure going on both with the piano as well as in the trombone through a good portion of the tune. That the guitar is really regulated to that timekeeping role we've talked about in the past, where you can barely hear what Roos is doing. I just hear kind of pretty much strict timekeeping. But beyond that, honestly, I was mesmerized by Israel Crosby on that rhythmically. He is so strong. He was 16 years old at the time of recording this date, and he's just so strong, and his playing is so advanced. I mean, to stick my neck out a little bit, it's almost Jimmy Blanton level, bass playing, coming out of a slightly different tradition. But he's just so present. He's so high up the neck, and he's got such a wonderful, pure sound. It's just great to hear him, and just a marvel that he was so young and had such a rich career over the course of the next few decades. So that's what I was.
This is his first record date. I'm pretty sure this is his first record date.
If it's not his first,
go ahead.
I was going to say, if it's not his first, it's one of his earlier ones. I thought the Jess Stacy date was before this. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
By a few days.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it's his first recording month.
Yeah, there we go.
Because the Jess Stacy date is part of the same series of sessions for Parlophone. So they were probably done back to back or something like that.
Right.
And the recordings of Israel Crosby with Fletcher Henderson are yet to come.
Right.
So,
and the ones with Albert Ammons, which are first.
That's right. And now that you mentioned Albert Ammons, we should talk about how much boogie woogie was being played in Chicago around this time, and by Ammons, Jimmy Yancey,
Mead Lux Lewis,
countless pianists we don't even know about to this day. But it's interesting. I wonder if that's why we heard boogie woogie figures in this particular arrangement. Was little bit of a tip of a cap to the Chicago boogie woogie players. But it was very effective, and it's one of the few examples we have of Jess Stacy playing a boogie woogie figure. I don't think he generally liked to do that too much, but he did it just right on there. It's nice to hear Gene featuring himself. He didn't do that so much with the big band, as we've talked about before. If you overplay on the drums in a big band, you're going to step on somebody else's part, or a fill by another instrument, or play through a break or something. But in a small band like this, with a minimal bit of arranging, Gene sounded very loose and free and wonderful. And so did Benny Goodman. Sounded like he was on a busman's holiday here, not having to lead the band, just being a a sideman having a great time. As for Nate Casebeer, he's one of the younger musicians in this ensemble. He was born in 1912, so he's actually younger than Goodman or Krupa or certainly Stacy. And his background was dance bands, hot bands. He played in Los Angeles, or Los Angeles, as we called it yesterday, with Seeger Ellis and his Choirs of Brass, the band that had a full brass section but only one reed, and that was Irving Fazzola on clarinet. And it was not a spectacular failure, but not a spectacular success either. But it had some wonderful players in it. And Nate's section mate was Benny Strickler from Arkansas, who played a very, very similar style. As we've discussed previously, there's a southwestern style of trumpet playing, as personified by Yank Lawson with Bob Crosby, and Benny Strickler with Bob Wills, and Nate with whatever bands he happened to play in. And they're all from the Southwest. Yank Lawson was from Missouri, Benny was from Arkansas, and Nate Casebeer was born in Lawrence, Kansas. So the geographical area is close to Benny Moten and Kansas City, where Lamar Wright with the Benny Goodman Orchestra pioneered that style.
Benny Moten.
Yes. What did I say?
Benny Goodman.
Benny Moten. That's what I meant. But it's a very relaxed cornet style, as opposed to Bunny Berrigan or Harry James or someone like that. There's kind of a hitch in the rhythm. It's pulling back instead of pushing forward, and that's one way I've been able to tell Nate Casebeer's playing all through these recordings we've listened to, because whoever else he was in the section with, Bunny Berrigan or Pee Wee Irwin or whoever it was, he has a very distinctive rhythmic way that he played. And we're hearing it, I know we're going to hear it on all of these tracks.
Yeah. Well, you know who else talked about that famously was John Lewis. John Lewis, was in New Mexico and in Little Rock and in various places in the late 20s and early 30s. Lester Young famously came down there to spend some time at the family house there, and John always felt, that there was, there's the Southwest, there's Oklahoma City, and there's Kansas City, and too many times, they're just swept as one thing. And man, they were all individual, Hot Lips, Charlie Christian and people like that, and absolutely fascinating. And that, this tune was written by, I have his name right here. I don't want to get it wrong. Was it Benny Hill? What's his name?
Billy Hill.
Billy Hill, of course. And he's a fascinating guy. He's from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Played in symphony orchestras, with some great conductors, and then went out and became a cowboy in Montana, and then wrote these tunes. And, his most famous tune is actually recorded by Goodman. We'll hear it later on, The Glory of Love. You got to give a little.
Yeah.
Da, da, da. But he also wrote this tune, which was a big hit. Rudy Valley, I believe, recorded it, and others. And it was quite a well-known tune in 1934, 1935.
Yeah, he wrote There's a Cabin in the Pines.
Yes.
And also The Old Spinning Wheel.
Yes. And Call of the Canyon.
Yep.
And a whole bunch of them. A fascinating guy. I'm imagining that Nick Rossi or some of our other Facebook friends could definitely go down a spider hole into this guy's stuff, you know what I mean, and find some fascinating stuff. The connections between Billy Hill and all these worlds that we talk about. My Lord, what a fascinating cat. All right, well, let's go to the second tune from the session, the Jazz Me Blues, a tune with a great heritage going back to Big Spiderback and so many other people. Lester Young was about to make a great record of it in a few years with Glenn Hardman, and the Basie Band played it too, and so did the Goodman Band. It was a very well-known tune. Anyway, here we go. I'll tell you, that is some of the most unusual trumpet playing I've ever heard in my life. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but I mean, that is so unusual. I mean, the way he's playing, the lead trumpet part in a we don't like the word Dixieland, but in a traditional front line, whatever you want to call that, this beautiful music that it is. He's so laid back. I mean, it's amazing, and I've never. I mean, I've listened to it. As I mentioned, I've loved these records for most of my life, but listening to it with you guys and just kind of listening to it in a new way, he's so laid back. He's like Miles Davis or something. I mean, it's just like less is more. I mean, have you ever heard lead trumpet on a hot jazz record like that? I never have.
No, not unless Armstrong plays in halftime or something like that. But this is about as relaxed as you can get. Although Yank Lawson could do that too, once in a while with the Bob Crosby band. When the rest of the band was being a pile driver, sometimes he'd hold back just a little bit and play it cool. And that's that Southwestern connection that Nate Casbier definitely had. But I love the effect. It's really nice to hear that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I mean it's as opposed to most music in this, if it can really generalize, in this idiom or whatever you want to call it. I mean, 99 out of 100 times it's climactic and the ensemble plays and there's a certain kind of, it's just part of the music. It's just part of what it is. And to hear someone do that with Gene Krupa on the drums and Benny Goodman and all this kind of, it's just really striking me on this last listening. I mean, especially in those climactic courses, even when they do that, you probably know the name of it. I think you mentioned it once in the show, when they do that Chicago crescendo and then the flare. I don't know what it's called.
It's called a stop and go.
Stop and go. Yeah.
They didn't all do it, but Benny and Gene certainly did, and Jess, the guys from Chicago, knew how to do that. And
I thought they all did it there. No, I mean, that 8 measures.
Now some of them played through the break. You're supposed to hit the 4th beat, leave out the 1st beat of the next measure, and then come back in.
Oh, like that.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Perfect. So some of them did it, but the effect was there, and that wonderful shuffle feeling leading up to it, and getting quiet and then bringing the volume back up. There weren't too many bands, small bands or big bands, doing that in that era. The Bob Crosby band would do that quite a bit, but that was still a couple years off.
Yeah. Nick, is Alan Roos there? I mean, I was really listening.
Are you there?
I was really listening carefully. And what did you hear? I mean, can you hear a guitar at all?
I didn't hear a lot. There was a couple moments where I thought I heard the guitar in there, but honestly, if we're not for the discographies, I would be seriously doubting whether there's a guitar there. And not having heard these sides in a while, I can't remember whether there's real ample evidence on the remaining 2 sides that Roos is on the session. But again, I was listening for rhythm figures. Jess is playing a lot of piano on this date, and we can hear him really well. And another thing we've talked about in the past is the positioning in the studio for the balance. And clearly they have, or at least to my ears, it sounds like they have Israel Crosby pretty close to the mic, giving him a spotlight.
Yeah.
Of course, the drums would be emphasized because it's Gene's date. So if there is a guitar, I would suspect that Alan Roos is placed further back than he typically has been heard on recording sessions that we've listened to date, which have been all his recording sessions. We just haven't heard anything that's very characteristic. But I'm just transfixed by the amount of rhythmic activity going on. It's very different than what we've heard before. It's not like the characteristic. It's the last session and the session before. It seems like we finally heard the Benny Goodman rhythm section. That he pioneered, or that the section pioneered, and now that's kind of all thrown out the window for this crazy melange of different kind of influences and players. That's wonderful to hear. I mean, we've talked about Chicago, we've talked about the Southwest, And both, and with Israel Crosby in there, it's bringing in a whole other set of traditions. So it's just really exciting from like a pure rhythmic standpoint.
And plus, I mean, Roos, whether it's on the broadcast or whether it's on the dates, like there's never a doubt that he's there.
Right.
And I'm starting to wonder if he's on the damn date. So we'll keep listening.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they had done the date with Jess, Gene, and Israel, the trio session. Why not use the same three guys for this date? We'll keep listening. And we are going to get to, after a couple of big band sessions, the famous Gene Krupa swing band session, where Alan Roos is the same exact rhythm section, and Roos he's like this, as he usually is in those swing sessions. So, interesting. Let's continue. We'll go to Three Little Words. Now, this is a tune that Benny loved. It later became Rachel's Dream. And it's just a set of chord changes that he really digs. Well, why don't we listen to it? We can talk after.
Well, I think after that side, we can say with almost without a reasonable doubt, there was no guitar on that side or this session. There was hardly any oral evidence that there could be any room for a guitar there, and I think that it explains why we hear a bit more from Jess in terms of the rhythmic figures he's playing. He's playing like a piano player would at the time in the absence of a guitar, covering some of that area. I think Gene too is playing slightly different in the absence of a guitar, and it's kind of interesting from that perspective how rhythm sections made up for lack of a standard rhythm section instrument. I think about stories of the Jay McShann band down in Kansas City, how Gus Johnson and Gene Ramey talked about specifically practicing an approach to play swing rhythm without a rhythm guitar, because there was no rhythm guitar initially in the McShann band for financial reasons, I believe. And so, sections would come up with ways to make up for the guitar, knowing that it was a bona fide part of the standard section. So again, I just was kind of mesmerized, transfixed mostly by Crosby's just unbelievable bass playing. I know people talk about these records. I know contemporary musicians talk about these records, but I hear this again after not having heard it for a while, and I want to go and grab all my bass playing friends by the scruff of their collar and say, "Have you listened to this lately?" Because it's just required listening. I mean, he's just such a phenomenal player straight out of the gate. And again, like I said, he had decades of wonderful music ahead of him, but he's so solid. He has such a personal stamp, such an interesting point of view from a rhythmic perspective, and it's a joy to listen to.
What's interesting about it?
It's not necessarily straight out of another tradition to my ears. It has the forcefulness of someone like a Pops Foster. It's got that kind of assertive feel of a New Orleans style bass player, but it has less of that rhythmic kind of pop and go. So it has more of that kind of almost, I don't like the word pure, but it's kind of more of a round sound that's less, just less rhythmic. It's the bass note, like we talked about with Harry Goodman. He's playing the notes. He's not necessarily adding rhythmic accents to it. And there's a bit of rhythm to his playing in terms of little pops and clicks and the such, but it's much more kind of this mix of assertive tone and just pure bass sound. It's great.
And that's not even talking about the notes he's playing, because
right.
The notes he's playing are so radically different from Foster or Bro or Harry Goodman or pretty much any bass player that you can talk about in 1935. I mean, he's playing lines and he's playing, scale notes, and Walter Page will do that, but Walter Page wasn't the bassist that Israel Crosby was. He was something else, a musical conceptualist, maybe as much as Israel Crosby became, because, his sound became, I think it's fair to say that the Ahmad Jamal sound is kind of built around what Israel Crosby brought to the bass line. But like you said, 17 years old, playing with that facility and that harmonic sophistication, and that chorus, that trio chorus, with Crosby in the lead, kind of with Benny, and then Gene in the back, kind of cooling it for a while, and then he just can't help himself, and he has to throw in some things like that, which are perfect. God, what a fascinating record. Hal?
Yeah, and that's something that bass and clarinet duet is something you don't hear at that time in jazz on record. We've probably all heard people do it with the groups that we play with and at jazz parties and festivals, but 1935, that was kind of a radical idea to have the piano and rhythm drop out, and Gene just play very quietly until, as you said, he couldn't help himself anymore. Then he played all those wonderful Chicago and New Orleans rolls behind those guys. And speaking of Israel Crosby, he's going to be part several years hence, a few decades hence, in fact, of another Goodman group that I really like and wish they had recorded more. The band that played at Basin Street East with Charlie Shavers, Mel Powell, Steve Jordan, Israel Crosby, and Maury Feld. That, to me, that's one of the great Goodman groups, but they just made very, very few recordings. But Israel Crosby was just solid as a rock with that band, just as he is here. He never lost anything in translation over the years. Fantastic player.
Yeah. There's a wonderful film of him. He died relatively young. I think we've talked about him a little bit before, but there's a wonderful, there's that TV show in 1959, I guess it is, with Buck Clayton and Vic Dickinson and George DeVivier and Hank Jones and the Ahmad Jamal trio. And it's really pretty much all we have in terms of, extended, just getting to see what he did and how he did it. What a fascinating guy. And but anyway, What a crazy record. I'm also thinking that there's another mistake in the personnel, because I'm really thinking that that's Art Rollini on tenor, not Dick Clark. So we'll look into that. Now, here is the Blues of Israel. And here it is.
There's a lot of unusual elements about that last performance. For one thing, bass was not heavily featured at that time on recordings. You think of Bull Fiddle Blues with Bill Johnson from 1928, and Page and the Devil with Walter Page, which was coming, that hadn't been recorded yet. So this is really kind of a standout to feature a bass player like that. And he made the most of it, of course. Just wonderful, big, full sound and interesting melodic ideas. And had it just been a bass solo with nothing else, I think it would have been a classic. But with that wonderful solo by Jeff Stacey, and I love the way Joe Harris played trombone. It's like a combination of Tommy Dorsey and Preston Jackson with the lip trills and wonderful ideas. Nate Casebeer's solo reminded me of Yank Lawson playing on something like 5 Point Blues with the Bobcats. It's very there's an Armstrong influence, but got that wonderful Southwestern lazy rhythm in the phrasing. In fact, a couple other things reminded me on this side, reminded me of Jimmy Noon's record of Blues Jumped a Rabbit. That from a year later, the year after this was made, that has a long solo by Preston Jackson on trombone that there's a lot similarity to what Joe Harris played on here. And Gene's press rolls on the last chorus behind Israel Crosby, very crisp, very well defined. We know that one of the people he listened to in Chicago was Tubby Hall. And Tubby Hall is the drummer on Jimmy Newton's Blues Jumped a Rabbit, played some of the very best press rolls ever recorded, as far as I'm concerned. And Gene, what I just heard Gene play is in that same class. But so much going on this record that would take 5 or 6 listenings and several of these programs to go through all of it, I think.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll tell you, it's just a magical performance from first note to last note. And, we've been talking about, and that's the way that we do it here. We kind of do an autopsy on each record, and we talk about it, and that's what we're here for. But this session in particular just seems like it's all of a piece, and there's a mood to these 4 sides, and they're all of a. It's like Kind of Blue, or the Lester Young Trio with Nat Cole, or let's all start naming our favorite records. But there's a mood. They're just all of a piece, and they're kind of lacking. We've all been using these adjectives, and and I use them. We all use them because that's how you describe things, is with adjectives. With Benny, especially with his band, there is a certain aggressiveness, or a certain, whatever word you want to call what he does, that his brilliance on all the records that they play. You know what I mean? And there's a certain drive to it, and that's what makes that Goodman band the Goodman band. It is not the laid-back band. It is a band that is like this all the time. And this session's not like that. Even with Gene, if you know what I mean. I mean, this is. I don't want to say lazy, but you know what I mean. Lazy in the best sense of the word, laid back. I think Nate Casebeer had a lot to do with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we've got to give Gene full credit for being such a good band leader on this session, because he portioned out the solos so everybody got to play something between the 4 sides. I think the person who probably had the least to play was Benny.
Yeah.
But everybody else got at least a chorus or a half chorus or something where you could hear their individual voice. And that's, to me, that's the mark of a good band leader, is you feature the sidemen and not yourself.
Right. Well, then Benny Goodman was not a good band leader. No, but
that's the mark of a good small band leader.
Okay. No, but it's true. And not only that, but that, I never thought about it till just now when you mentioned it, that it is Gene Krupa's record session. And what kind of young hotshot drummer like he was, about to become a big star, wouldn't at least have one drum feature or one tune with the, just with the drums up front.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. That never occurred to me before. Well, I'll tell you what, while we were listening to it, I went back and checked the contemporary press to see what they wrote about the session at the time. First of all, Alan Roos is not mentioned in the first blips about it. Later on, he's mentioned as being on the date. But in the very first writings about it, he's not mentioned. And the tenor player isn't mentioned in the very first blips. And then later on, they say it's Dick Clark on the tenor. But I'll leave it open, and I'm curious. People will be watching these. If there's 3 or 4 people who care about what we're doing to the level that we're doing it at, I have no idea. But I'm hoping that there are, and that people will vote. We'll have a vote. Who do you think the tenor player is? Really, really interesting. Yeah. Or to see the original Parlophone records and see if they had personnel on them. In fact, I'd like to put out a call here. I would love to get good 78 transfers. I actually have these on a brown Decca label 78s in my collection, which I can't put my hands on, because the transfers we just heard are not great. They're okay, but they're not wonderful. And now for a surprise.
Special arrangement and a special little orchestra called the Jam Dandies from Benny Goodman's orchestra, and they play a Jim Jam jazzy arrangement of I'm Gonna Sit Right Down and Write Myself a Letter. ladies and gentlemen, is your introduction to the Jam Dandies, 8 boys in complete accord as to what Jim Jam jazzy music should be, with, of course, the clarinet being under the able direction of Benny Goodman.
We just heard the live version of the Jim Jam Dandies, and nice conclusion to this great session that we've been listening to. The great Gene Krupa session for Parlophone. Man, it sounded like after that tenor solo, and again, I think it's Art Walidi. I don't think it's Dick Clark. But Benny came on like a bat out of hell. Jesus. Yeah.
That sounded, it was similar to the Bobcats a little bit and similar to the Clam Bake 7.
Bake 7. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
But Nate Gaisber's lead there reminded me so much of Yank Lawson with both of those groups. And certainly the drumming couldn't be mistaken for Ray Baduke. That was 100% Gene Krupa, with all the tom-tom turnarounds, all the good New Orleans and early Chicago licks that he knew. Benny's playing, you may disagree with me, but reminded me of Frank Teschmacher with that kind of excitement and excitement. I don't know what other adjective I can put there, and Jess Stacy all over the keyboard. He sounded like he was having the time of his life. Yeah. And in the last chorus, that beautiful Chicago stop and go, where they hit the fourth beat and backed off for the first beat of the next measure, and then came flying back in. That's as good as any small band recording I can think of from the 30s. I've never heard that before, and that made my day, believe me.
Well, it's interesting because it's just at that moment. That's on January 20th, 1936. So Goodman's already recorded the small group stuff with Teddy Wilson. Probably knows it's in the works that Teddy's going to come out at some point, maybe in a couple of months, to do something. But it's very possible that if that hadn't worked out, if Teddy had said no, in the contemporary press, Teddy's already being set up to be a band leader in 1935. And if that had happened, maybe the Goodman small group just would have been another Clam Bake 7 or something like that, with that kind of Dixielandish or traditional jam. Really fascinating.
Yeah.
God, they played great. Nick, anything to add?
Well, I'll tell you, what struck me was how little room there was for guitar, or I should say how ineffective kind of the guitar was in that context, apart from a timekeeping device. I mean, we've talked about it before, where a lot of times the guitar's there just for the band to keep things kind of on track, if you will. I was second-guessing my ears, or I was second-guessing the discographers and straining to hear a guitar for a good portion of it until Roos missed one of the breaks and added a couple strums in there by mistake. And I said, okay, yeah, he's definitely there. But it's kind of interesting to hear that music played without a banjo, right? Because we're used to hearing it played with the banjo, or played, if it's Eddie Condon, it's a different tuned instrument, a higher pitched stringed instrument. So Alan was there, in my estimation, primarily just to keep holding things together the entire time.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, that's a nice little dessert at the end of one of the great sessions of all time. Gene Krupa and his Chicagoans. Yeah, Gene Krupa and his Chicagoans recorded for Parlophone, November 18th or 19th, 1935. Thanks, Hal. Thanks, Nick. And we'll be back with the big band at a marathon session of November 22nd, 1935.